daughter. Lucky to have caught him in person for this interview. To record this interview, I met Sridhar Vembu in his parents' house on the outskirts of Chennai, the very same house where Sridhar's entrepreneurial journey began 20 years ago. In this 1-hour podcast, we discuss a lot of very interesting topics, and you will absolutely love the conversation. Trust me, it'll be absolutely worth your time. So, buckle up and let's listen to Sridhar Vembu. Sridhar, thank you so much for coming on the Movers and Shakers podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Interesting that we are doing this interview sitting in an independent house in Tambaram, Chennai, where Zoho all began. So tell us about it.
So that was about 20 years ago. This is my parents' house. They live downstairs and we have some room upstairs. So when we got started, lacking money, that's where it's a natural place to get started. There's room upstairs and parents don't demand rent. At least Indian parents don't. So that's how we get started.
So let's rewind even further back. Tell us about your educational background. And you went to IIT Madras. So tell us from there. And you got the 27th rank in IIT JEE. Any sane guy would have chosen computer science. But you chose electrical engineering. Why?
I actually don't. I remember going to counseling and then finding out that computer science would involve a lot of programming, and that did not sound like engineering to me, at least when I was 17. Engineering meant real physical things. How do you just sit in front of a computer and type something and call it engineering, right? So I thought, I want to do real engineering, so I don't want to do computer science. That was about the basis of why I chose.
And then after IIT Madras, you went to the US to do your PhD.
Yeah. In PhD in electrical engineering, the same subject. By then, it had become pretty mathematical. It wasn't engineering, it wasn't software. It was pretty much proving theorems at that point.
And then you went into a 9-to-5 job.
Yeah, I went to Qualcomm to basically be a research, what they call a systems engineer, which is basically their R&D group, where we are supposed to come up with new ways of wireless communications. At that time, CDMA was the hot thing, which later went on to become 2G, 3G, 4G, all that.
So when did the entrepreneurial streak strike you and why?
That was about the time I was in Qualcomm, and partly it was driven, my brother was there, Kumar. He was a software engineer, I was a systems engineer. And you talk a lot about how nothing is made in India. Well, whenever we go to the store here, we see made in Taiwan to made in Korea. Made in China wasn't yet that common then. Later it became made in China, everything, but you'll see a made in Japan, but you won't see any made in India. So you think nothing is made in India. Why are we so bad? Then you realize, there's no point complaining about it. You have to go do something then. And it was also clear that this was about 1995, that software is what is beginning to get made in India more. At that time, even companies like Infosys were small. In 95, they were not very big. But it was clear that software is starting to happen. Yeah. So that was the impetus. So we felt nothing is being made in India, and we wanted to do something about it. Then you realize software is actually what is maybe in the beginning of being made. And software also naturally suggests itself because it doesn't need any money, which brings back to, then we can stay upstairs and not pay rent and start doing it.
So you come back to India, and did you have a clear vision what you guys wanted to do?
No, there was no clear idea at all. It was something to do with software was all that there was. Which again, you get the idea if you read a lot of the startup stuff now, that people always have a clear, we're going to change the world in this or that. I don't believe most companies are started that way, honestly. If you go find out Honda as an example, there's not a vision, I don't believe, that this is going to become the Honda we know today. It's more like, let's get started, let's see where it takes us. Unfortunately, that ideas disappeared now because, in fact, it has to disappear once funding comes in, right? Because anybody who funds you has to know exactly what you plan to do. This whole idea that we'll figure it out as we go is not a fundable plan, but it's a good plan. So what if it's not fundable? It's still a good plan.
So it's very easy to start up. I mean, you see so many startups. If a college, a lot of people get started, but only very few people take it on to the next stage, scale up, make it into a sizable company, take it global. What is it that you did it right?
No, I think a lot of it is also what is your motivation when you get started. Today we have glorified this to a point where you almost have to a startup as like a part of your resume checklist item now. Then, there's no conviction. You're not going to last very long if it's just a checklist item. Because it's actually a business, regardless of what anybody says, it remains hard. It's not hard just because of funding is hard or any of those things. It's hard because it's actually hard to persuade someone to buy your product. Nothing can change that fact. That's hard. Whatever you build, anything, doesn't matter whether you're a tea seller or a software seller or whatever. How do you persuade a customer to actually come and purchase your product versus someone else's product? That part it's no amount of, all the funding, all of the ecosystem, all of that can solve that problem. That's the problem that each entrepreneur has to solve for himself or herself. So that's the core.
And that's the role that you took it on yourself, Sridhar, which also explains why you're based in the Silicon Valley bulk of the time. So you had no formal education in marketing, no MBA, I would assume. So how did you build this habit of evangelizing your company and also evangelizing the technology?
So it's very simple, right? I thought of it this way. Well, now that we are in business, there is no business if there is no customer. If we don't bring in money, we don't eat. Somebody has to again take up the problem. Well, you already, you are in business. So I said, okay, now I am a salesman. In fact, that's I just said from today I have to be a salesman because if I don't sell, I don't bring in any money and we don't eat. It's simple, right?
So are there any best practices, I'm talking about from a leadership perspective, that has really worked for you? So for example, number one, your family members, your brothers, your sister, your brother-in-law are an integral part of the company leadership. When I grew up, I was told never to involve friends or family. Clearly, you've broken that mold. So tell us about what are some of the things that really worked for you?
It's not family or friends or any of those. It's do people perceive people who are broader people? Is this person is here because he or she earned their place? That's all the key is. Do they carry their weight? Do they actually contribute? Or are they just here just because they're related to me? That's the key question. And if that is addressed, this issue doesn't arise. Here, if you take any of my own relatives in the company, from the earliest days, people know what their contribution is. Whether you can go look at their code, you can go look at what they have designed, what product they have shipped, the quality of their thinking. If it's not there, they won't be in that position. That's simple.
How do you identify great leaders? Because one Zoho University is a brilliant example. So I'm sure we'll get deep into that. But I'm more interested in the second rung of leadership. How do you identify, how do you groom, and more importantly, how do you convince them to stay for the long term?
So with any leadership in any area or anything at all, whether it's technical leadership or project management leadership, product management, or business leadership, sales, any of those. Philosophy I follow is you find them, you keep them. Meaning you cannot predict ahead of time who would have a leadership capability in what area. Which means in the beginning you go through a lot of trials of what can a person do. And then at some point people find the groove. Rajendran here is a very good example, right? He is a really good public speaker, as you know. He's a Zoho evangelist. He travels around India giving talks which are so well received, they want him back again and again.
I've seen him. We've been co-speakers in a couple of platforms, and I completely agree with you.
That's an example, right? What was his original job here? He was a Java programmer. A Java programmer to public speaker, there's not some linear path. This is not a career path where you can say, hey, I'm a Java programmer, next year I'll be this, next year, and then it leads to public speaking. In fact, there are Java programmers who have become marketeers in the company, or who've gone on to become salespeople or support people, whatever. There's a lot of things. So that's the key. In his case, one thing I found out quickly is that he doesn't have stage fright. He can go up and speak in front of an audience. And he has a good command of language. No stage fright, good command of language. He can articulate ideas well. That's it. So you become a speaker. And now it has become his primary career now.
So for the audience, we are talking about Rajendran, who is Director of Engineering at Zoho.
Now we call him Zoho Evangelist.
Zoho Evangelist, who also happens to be Sridhar's brother-in-law. So amongst all your second rung, I want you to close your eyes, Sridhar, and think of all the key people in your organization who have really grown up. And I want you to now let our listeners know what are some of the key qualities that have made them successful.
First of all, actually, one thing that's fairly unique about Zoho is the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of people in leadership in Zoho join Zoho with no prior experience at all. That would be about maybe 95% of the people. We're not talking about like 70, we're talking about 95%. That's something that's very interesting, right? So, which means that we have actually groomed our own leadership inside. And they come in, one first thing to realize is they come in all kinds of different profiles. As people, what their interests would be. For example, Rajendran is a great public speaker. This does not mean all our leaders are great public speakers. In fact, there are people who make an awesome contribution in the company who will never go in front of microphone. They don't want to. Not that I don't want them to, but they don't want to. That's an example. Yeah, Raj is here actually. Again, his wife, that is my sister, is a great example of that. She actually builds the Zoho Mail product. She's responsible for it. She runs the team. That's over 100 people. But you can't get her to speak in front of a camera. It's hard. She doesn't want to. She prefers to do her work, out of the limelight, right? There's a lot of people like that. What I'm trying to say is even between Rajendran and Radha, husband and wife, there is very different personalities here in terms of their leadership styles. They're both leaders, but they are different personalities here. And this is true throughout the company. You take our senior managers, there are people who are very focused on technology. There are people who have a really good focus on marketing, people who have good product management or design orientation, people who have a market, sales, business development orientation, you name it, finance, all of those leaderships. But they're different.
Sridhar, I've noticed that Zoho is such a rich place which grooms great leaders. It also grooms great entrepreneurs. And I must bring the subject of the Zoho Mafia, which is, in the US, PayPal Mafia is very popular where people have gone on to do phenomenal startups. And so has Zoho has created. Is that a good thing or a not so good thing?
It's a very good thing, actually. Anything successful in this, it's also measured by the whole ecosystem it creates. Part of why this kind of make in India is so important, a company like Zoho is so important, is all the side effects it creates where over time those things, so you spread a lot of these seeds. So I think that is a good thing. It's good for the city, and it's good for the country, the broader ecosystem here, right? So that is a good thing. And the reason Zoho is able to produce that is, as I mentioned, first realization is there's not a single mold of this is the Zoho leader like. There is a lot of different kinds of people who make up even the leadership. And they don't all agree with me. They don't agree with me on everything. So have a system where we have substantial autonomy for people who are doing a job. Could be shipping a product or responsible for a market, any of those. And that itself then becomes a training ground for people in leadership, in business itself. That's why I think this phenomenon happens. I think I look at it as a good thing. It's a testimony to the strength of the leadership team in Zoho that there's so much is happening outside Zoho too.
So there was this report that came out, I think it's in Business World or Economic Times, I don't recollect. But while Bangalore is considered the capital, the software capital, Chennai is considered the SaaS capital, software as a service. So I asked Ramraj, who is the ex-TAI Chennai president and founder of SIFI, and I asked him, what is it that made Chennai as the capital of SaaS? And he said, one name, Sridhar Vembu. So he says that, one company, one person has really spawned such awesome entrepreneurs and awesome companies. And so credit to you.
I think it's maybe a little bit of an exaggeration. Zoho has definitely played a role. I don't want to take the credit myself. As I said, the leadership cadre in Zoho is substantial now and varied in its skills. So I think collectively that leadership cadre is what actually is responsible for it, I would say, for the spawning this ecosystem in Chennai.
Zoho is right now the talk of the town because of the Chinna Annachi video, where this is a video to promote Zoho Desk, which is your latest product. And the reason why it's in the news is because it has been completely built out of a small town in Tamil Nadu called Tenkasi, and beautifully shot video. And I was stunned to hear from Raj that it was actually shot by Zoho employees itself, conceptualized, shot, edited. So that's phenomenal. So let's talk about it. Why are you fascinated with Tenkasi or rural Tamil Nadu?
Well, it's Tenkasi in particular. It's a very beautiful region. I mean, if you go there, you cannot not fall in love. But more broadly, we have to take development itself and make in India more broad-based. Otherwise, we are drawing in, sucking in too much of the talent away from rural areas, number one. We are also making cities unlivable. But these are two sides of the same coin. I mean, Chennai region is about 10 million people. It's 1 in 7 people in the state now live in Chennai region. Do we want it to become 1 in 2? Do we want Chennai to become 30, 40 billion people, like Mexico City or Tokyo region is? Delhi region is metro, NCR is now 25 million people. Do we want to go it to 100 million? And where does it stop? Mumbai. Do we want it to be 50 million, 70 million? So the path we are on, this is what is going to happen. Suck all the talent and then just dump into these massive cities. But I think I want to explore a better way, an alternative way. I always think about these problems and just like I said, why is nothing made in India? Well, let's go make something. I think, why are we pulling so many people from rural areas? And I realize we are doing that. Actually, I joke that Zoho is probably responsible for about 10,000 of the 6 million population increase in Chennai in the last 20 years. We contributed about 10,000 our share because so many people we brought in, right? Then I realized if we are operating the same way in the next 10 years, we may contribute another 50,000 to Chennai. And it doesn't seem wise. So, to some extent, if you hate the traffic, blame us, right? Sure. But that's why, why don't we do something else, something different? Which then says smaller town, and how small is small, right? I came up with this thing that about 100,000 people is a good size. It's not too small. You have some amenities. Not too big. So, and then the Western Ghats region is beautiful. So all the way from Pollachi to Theni, Tenkasi, all of those areas. And Tenkasi suggested itself. So that's how we came up with it.
And also, over 90% of your employees anywhere are from rural. Yes. So it makes sense for you to go where they are.
Well, our 90% of our employees are not from Chennai. Put it that way. They come from interior various towns or villages in Tamil Nadu. Also these days from sometimes out of state. Maybe 200 or 250 are from Bihar and UP now. Because they come as students and then we hire them.
Oh, so, you mean the rural places in Bihar and UP?
Rural, yeah. Smaller towns mostly, I guess. Right. So I don't know if it's a village, but smaller towns at least. But we are drawing all this now. In the process, we are making the city more difficult to live in ourselves. Collectively, all of companies like us. And it's only companies like us can solve the problem because the migration happens because of a job. If you create a job somewhere else, people go there. So that's the basis for it.
Now I see other companies like Fixnix, or you've inspired me to do, which is build something in our own villages. It's easy to follow a leader. But when you did, I think there was nobody else who did this, which is have the gumption to take 12th standard pass or fail someone who is considered a loser, even in the villages, but put trust on those guys and girls, get them in, train them. I mean, this is like a recipe for disaster if you asked anybody else. But you backed your idea and now it's success. So what gave you the gumption? And second, what motivated you?
So always you run small experiments. It's stated the way you stated it looks very big. But the way it actually happened is not so big as, let's try this. Let's do it with, what was the first batch? Like we had one professor who's still there, is going strong at almost 68, 70 now. Wow. And 6 students. So one professor and 6 students. That's kind of experiment a lot of people can afford. Sure. Say you want to try with 2 students and maybe 1 part-time faculty. You can try. If it fails, it fails. If it succeeds, you grow, scale it up, right? So that was how it started. But it started about 12 years ago. And now it's grown to about 150, 130 students this year with maybe about 6 or 7 faculty members. So that's how it is.
Got it. That's good. So this also I get an important lesson out of this conversation saying that it's important to experiment, try new ideas, but start small.
Try small experiments. Even our Tenkasi office started with 3 people who moved there. Then it grew to about 6 people. It stayed at about 6 people for about 6 or 9 months, I remember. Those 6 people were getting somewhat lonely. I remember visiting them, and it's only 6 people in an office right near the Tenkasi temple, the Kasi Vishwanath temple. And I visit them, 6 guys in an office, and they're feeling a little bit lonely, right? I said, stay the course, guys, it'll get better. Now we have about 120, and already they say, oh man, it's getting crowded here.
So I've known many other software product companies, especially Sridhar, who do not want to associate anything Indian because their customers are global. They want to give a very global feel. In fact, if you go to their website, it'll look just as international as any other company in the US or Australia. If you go to their contact address, you will hardly find any Indian addresses, even though their development centers are in India. So that is, if you ask them why, they'll say, hey, this is for a global clientele, this is for a global market, and we have to look global. On the other hand, you guys just made a 5-minute video telling how rural a company can get and how the product is being built by rural people. Could it work out to be counterproductive, or do you think this is great?
I don't think this way. I mean, take this word global, right? Well, India is part of the globe. Last time I checked, it's not, being Indian, does it kind of disqualify us from being global? But more seriously, you look at, what does a Samsung convey to you? Samsung is a global company, but it's also rooted in Korea. You know that.
Yep.
What does Honda convey to you? It's a global company, but it's rooted in Japan. Everybody knows that. Why do we have to pretend to be something we are not? We are Indian, and that's not disqualifying in the world, right? It's not like you go to Germany and try to sell your software. Hey, you are from India, we won't buy from you. I don't know anybody who says that, actually. Maybe a tiny percentage, but really it's not an impediment to success at all. And in fact, on the other hand, a lot of people appreciate us for being authentic, not hiding our true origin, that pretending to be someone we are not. That actually counts for a lot in this world too. So.
That's also where the credibility and the respect comes in. Right? One of the reasons why the video has gone very viral is because you've gone in and been honest. What's the future plan? I heard in one of the conversations that Tenkasi will be a very important place, and you foresee it 50-50 between Chennai and Tenkasi. That's a big statement. That's our hope right now. That's what we are working towards. But it all depends on how many people we hire there versus in Chennai, how many people want to. There are people who want to move from Chennai to Tenkasi. There's already a wait list. All of those things. But roughly, we hope that it will become substantial. I don't know 50% what the percentage will be, but it will have a substantial number of our employees in maybe a 5-year to 10-year time frame. What advice would you give for somebody like me? I own a farm. I'm very passionate about my own village, and I'm sure there are many other people with the same thing, but forces of circumstances take them to cities like Chennai, Mumbai, Delhi. What would be your advice out to them? Start doing something small. Maybe you create a 1-room computer center, and there's probably a local person who has some training who doesn't have a job. Make that person a trainer, right? For kids, young kids, start like that. And let's see where it goes. Because a lot of times, you have to, just like this business itself, like Zoho itself, there wasn't a grand plan of 20-year plan what we will be. In fact, I'm sitting in this very house. 20 years ago, I remember having meetings in this very room with our people then, maybe all 7 of us then. Rajendran was there. I remember stating the goal of the company as putting food on the table. I remember that distinctly. Guys, our fundamental goal is how do we put food on the table? That doesn't sound like a very romantic, appealing goal, but that was the goal then. So I always say start something small and see where it goes, and go where the paths take you. About a decade ago, I'll tell you how I got familiar with you, Sridhar. About a decade ago, I read an interview where I was shocked when in the interview you actually told the interviewer that I would like to send out a message to all investors in the world. please don't call me. And that was like, wow, whether this guy is like extremely confident or he's gone off his rails. That was my impression. And you stuck on to that goal. Zoho is famous for not taking any funding at all. Explain the fundamentals.
That's actually not as big a deal as it sounds, because first, investors will call you anyway if they can make money out of you. You have to remember, investors are not calling you because they love you. Investors are calling you because they can make money out of you. By saying that, you know what, don't call me, there's no ego. Any good investor knows, if I can make money out of Zoho, I will invest money in Zoho, regardless of what the CEO tells me whether to call him or not call him. So what sounds to you like, this guy is turning down all of these people, they will put money if they see a way to make money. That's it. It's not personal, as they say. It's nothing personal. If they can put in X dollars and make it 10X, they'll put in money. I mean, this is like famously, Zuckerberg showed up to an investor meeting with in his pajamas and said, screw you, this is what I am. They still invest money in him, right? Yeah. So that's what actually it is. Meaning investors will put money in you if they see a path to making 10X, 50X, 100X, the money. That's it. No matter what you are, what kind of statements you're making about whether you want investor money or not. In fact, a lot of them like people who don't want investor money because they think that's a better risk for them. So I'm just giving you. So this by itself is not as, it sounds like forever nobody will ever touch us. That's not true. First of all, there's not like some global blacklist of venture capital that these guys we will never ever invest in. Anybody who makes money, they will invest. That's it.
Got it. Why should startup companies bootstrap? Or in other words, why did you decide to bootstrap?
So, as I said in the beginning, there was no idea what we wanted to do, right? We know we wanted to do something in software. And that's not a fundamental business plan. You take that business plan to anybody. Even now, when venture capital is relatively easy to get, in 95 it was not easy to get. But now it's easy to get. But even now, we will figure it out as we go along is not a plan. So that's the first one. The second was, once we made some money, once we figured out some plan, you realize that how much of business is you evolve with the opportunities that arise. Cloud wasn't a thing in 95, 96. No, the cloud word did not exist. It only started to come in about 2007, 8. We got in about 2005. Even that time, cloud wasn't the word used then. It's more like maybe on-demand software or something. So in 95, you asked me, you would be called Zoho. I wouldn't know, because the Zoho name itself didn't exist. We registered the name, or we acquired the name much later, right? The name changed. The products changed. The business plans changed. For example, from selling software to selling subscriptions, all that changed. These changes are not so easily predictable. Similarly, now sitting here in 2016, I cannot tell you what we will be in 2025. Who knows? Maybe we'll make hardware. Who knows? We'll be doing something else. We don't know, right? But that, to me, part of being in business is to keep those opportunities open for evolution. But investors want easily categorizable things, I'd call it. They want to slot it into, this is a social media company, or that is a enterprise SaaS company. They don't have patience for a company that is experimental and go with what this is. They think that's unfocused. But from their perspective, it makes sense even. I'm not focused on providing them 100x return. I don't care. Why should I care about giving them 100x return, right? I'm here to have fun. And I'm here to also, our employees explore and find interesting things to do. Along the way, make some money, live well. But the thought that we have to provide 100x return to somebody else, I don't know anybody who gets motivated by that, honestly, no matter what they say. So that's why we didn't take money, because to leave open the possibility of exploration, preserve our freedom. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to.
So when should entrepreneurs seek external funding, according to you?
Well, there are cases where, if we are going to try to build a bullet train, for example, or a fab, a semiconductor fab, If you're going to build a semiconductor fab in Chennai, that's going to be at least a $2 billion, maybe $5 billion. So obviously investment would be needed. So there are very capital intensive areas where investment would be needed. Or if we have to build a Tesla here, I don't see how we can do it without investment. But on the other hand, maybe in 10 years, if we want to build something like that, a self-driving car, maybe we would have already made enough money to fund it. Who knows? So I don't deny that there's investment needed for many things. But that doesn't mean a lot of things they are investing in need investments. That's how I'll put it.
So your famous answer when somebody asked you, what is your exit strategy? And you replied, death. Yeah. Explain.
So, everything ends one day. That's the essential Buddhist idea is everything will end. This too will pass. So like that, the body, the company, everything else, someday it will be no more. So that's the natural exit. Life has an exit, right? So that's what I meant.
So in other words, no selling the company ever.
I don't have any vision of selling the company. So.
Sure. I also like your, because you brought the Buddhist principle, you like this concept of stoicism, which is don't get overly excited, don't get overly sad. Is that something?
The middle path, moderation, that's what Buddha says, right? Moderation in all things. It's not that don't enjoy nice things or don't feel sad ever. It is that keep in mind during all that even this will pass. Whatever it is, it will pass. That's it.
What is happiness to you? What brings you tremendous amount of happiness?
There are times when you have an idea that's speculative. Maybe something like Tenkasi itself, an example. Where did we try this experiment? And then you see it come to fruition where a product is launched and the product is very good. It's made there. It's like a thrill of a discovery. You discovered something new, fact about existence in a way, right? It's the same thing with our Zoho University. There's something that is only an idea. In fact, Zoho University, I remember very well. Again, it was maybe about 10 years ago or 12 years ago. I was talking to Rajendran. We were talking about, college education, how it's kind of useless anyway for what you do at work. Then we just said, why don't we just try maybe hiring some high school grads, do something. He said, you know what? I have an uncle who actually is a college professor who is dissatisfied with being in college, who is talking about doing something on his own like this. You should talk to him. It was a casual conversation with him on maybe we should do something like hiring high school kids and training ourselves. Led to his uncle, whose name is also Rajendran, by the way, Professor Rajendran, who then came on board a month later, and that ended up being the seed of Zoho University. And today it's almost like an institution where there's 150 kids, 120 kids this year have joined. But it came from that idea, and it's very gratifying to see an idea go and develop to this level now. So that's what is happiness.
Beautiful. Great explanation, Sridhar. Every successful person has done a lot of mistakes in life, has overcome from failure. What has been your biggest failures?
So I would consider the whole fact that I went through the PhD and spent maybe 5.5 years on it was maybe the biggest thing. I wouldn't call it a failure as much as I wouldn't repeat it if I were to live all over again. Because when you are living through it, you don't know you are failing at this. But only a lot of times that's what is life, right? You go back and look back and say, you know what? I wouldn't repeat that. That's one thing I wouldn't repeat.
So how do you constantly keep improving yourself? Do you look up to other people? Do you imbibe others, things that you admire? So what makes Sridhar Vembu better every single day?
First of all, I don't obsess about getting better question, because that's a good way to feel restless and pain. But what I do is when I see something nice, a good an example in Japan or a German company doing something interesting or anything, a good piece of art, I try to spend some time appreciating what makes this unique. What is good about this? What is good about this piece of art? Or what is good about this Japanese product? Or any of those. Then I work backwards. How do they produce that? Maybe I'm just too much of still that engineer. How do they produce this? Path of inquiry, just asking those questions often opens up mental pathways.
So how do you keep yourself updated with these happenings around? Tell us about your reading pattern, your reading style.
So I read a lot. That's somewhat scattershot, a variety of topics, like reading a book on black holes and cosmology, theory of the universe, right? How the universe is, Big Bang, all that. And I'm also reading this book called Slack, why workplaces need a degree of freedom. Slack, they call it too. In other words, everybody should not be kept busy all the time. There should be enough leeway. This is what Google tried to formalize as the 20% time, but the idea is you should not keep everyone busy all the time. There has to be some time to roam around. That's a book. It's called Slack, the key to avoid burnout, all of that. So that's another book I've been reading. So I read blogs, variety of blogs and variety of subjects. Technical, for example, this morning I've been reading on JavaScript performance. So that's like that.
So at IIT Madras, Bertrand Russell and Ayn Rand are supposed to be as good as professors to you because you would bunk classes and read these. What kind of an impact has early reading made on your character?
So I would say my political philosophy formed early in life. Maybe I became socialist at the age of 12 and became capitalist at the age of 16 or something. So it was early, actually, I remember. In other words, if there was something that early on I was keenly interested in, I would say it is political philosophy more than even science or mathematics as much. So that's what led me to read Russell. And then George Orwell, 1984, I read. Then I would read Ayn Rand at that time. So a lot of these, first thing is you get to, one of the things you develop is the habit of thinking for oneself. So that's the habit I developed from early on. And that, whether it's socialism, whether it's capitalism, whatever, I'm going to think through this and come up with some opinions, philosophies, whatever convictions I have by myself. So that was one habit I developed. And then that slowly, one of the formative books that influenced this company itself a lot would be The Road to Serfdom, Hayek. So that book is considered like a libertarian philosophy book. The idea is why you want a very decentralized, autonomously interacting things rather than a centralized command and control, which exactly is how our company is structured in many ways. A lot of decentralized autonomous teams is how I've described, which brings us to that whole, how the leadership gets formed because of that decentralized autonomous teams we have. But that comes from a political philosophy that I picked up.
Sure. So I must say you're very unpopular in IIT Madras, not just you, your entire batch of 85 to 89, Sridhar, because until then there was no concept of attendance, but you guys were so notorious that after that IIT Madras started to make attendance mandatory. So your attendance percentage was abysmal.
It wasn't as bad as some of my classmates. I was again the middle path, right? I was not the best, I was not the worst, I was maybe in the middle. Maybe my attendance average would have been about 40-50% of the classes. About roughly 50% I didn't attend, 50% I attended. Which was pretty good, I thought.
So the rest 50% you spent on doing what you liked doing?
Well, reading and a lot of discussions in the hostel, maybe some playing and whatever. But one thing it was clear even then to me, I wasn't super motivated by electronics or taking a class in television engineering, or it's not that television engineering is intrinsically not interesting or fiber optic communication is not interesting. Later, this has become now part of my philosophy. It is the wrong time. It is the wrong context. You cannot inflict on someone context free. Hey, you know what? You should learn television engineering. Someday it will be useful to you. That's not a good way to supply education, in my opinion. Most people need a reason. Why should I learn about television? Of all the million, Wikipedia has more than 2-3 million articles. Of all the 3 million subjects that's out there, why should I learn television engineering right now? There is no, IIT could not supply a good reason. That's why students had trouble attending. And that's, I think, is fundamental. I think they have to rethink. I'm rethinking this model in Zoho University, right? This whole model has to be rethought, because you take an 18-year-old and you say, you should learn fiber optic communication because someday it'll be useful to you. That's not a valid reason for that 18-year-old. On the other hand, you say, here is a company that needs fiber optic communication. This specialized, we have to squeeze so much data in this fiber. That's how you get your cell phone calls. That's motivation. There is a job, there is something to do, all that. So you cannot supply motivation like just in case, because there is 2 million articles in the Wikipedia. I could have been learning about concrete. I could have been learning about, cosmology. Why television engineering now? That's the problem.
So you are CEO of a large company, about 4,500 employees and over 1 lakh customers. And then you say you take time out to read. I see a super busy schedule for you. So what's your schedule like, and what are some of your productivity hacks?
So actually, I'm not as busy as you would think. I'm busy in the sense I keep myself occupied, but I don't overschedule myself with endless meetings. In fact, that's a hallmark of the company. We actually avoid meetings in general. Occasionally meetings happen, but it's not a meeting culture where all the time people are sitting in meetings. That includes myself, that includes all our senior managers, that includes managers, developers, anybody, the same thing. That we don't spend a lot of time in meetings at all, very minimal. So that's a key productivity hack, avoid meetings. Like that. I would also say about myself, I don't consider myself a highly organized person. And different people in our company have different degrees of being organized. Some are very organized, some are very unorganized. I probably fall somewhere in the, middle path of that spectrum, where I'm not heavily disorganized or completely organized. So I'm kind of in the middle somewhere. But it's, you have to find what works for you. What style, habit works for you. I am an early morning person, as an example. I like to get up early, like 5 a.m. or maybe even sometimes 4:30. Some other people could be late night people. So you have to find what works for you. That's what I would say. But whatever it is, the key is not to let comparison and suffering. Hey, I am not like that person who's highly organized or whatever. Because you have to find what works for you.
So our listeners are super interested in knowing what's a typical day in the life of Sridhar Vembu. So paint us a picture. So you wake up at 5 a.m. and then?
So I would be reading through the emails, responding, and then we have an internal social network where we have posts and blogs, all that, and then I chat with our people a lot. If I wake up at 5 a.m. in US, I usually have a lot of people in our Chennai office, so I'll be chatting with them. A lot of work happens on chat. Then I do maybe an hour of yoga, actually with a yoga master here in Chennai. Usually that's either mornings or in the afternoons I do. And I go for a walk, collect my thoughts. Then I try to write something. Writing will be usually internal posts. Usually it'll be something related to our technology product. Occasionally it'll be like economics. But again, related to business. How, for example, a global economic situation impacts our business. Those type of topics I'll write. Then I would be interacting with people, and I take at least an hour or two of unstructured think time. So just thinking about something. The topic could be education, the topic could be technology or JavaScript performance or something. But I would have a solid, maybe an hour or two I'll be thinking about. So.
Who do you look up to? Who are the people that you admire?
So one of the people from my teams I looked up to was the founder of Singapore, Lee. It's very contextual, right? Why Lee Kuan Yew? Because he took a country from a third world. It was Singapore in 1965 was very similar to Chennai. Wasn't that different. And today Singapore is one of the richest countries in the world. I mean, one of the richest in the world. You know, almost Switzerland level of prosperity there. So how does a person take a country from third world to in 40 years to a first world country, 40, 50 years? And that was always fascinating. And which also shows that it's in mathematics. I mean, I'm still thinking mathematical terms. That's an existence proof, as they call it. That means it's possible. It should be possible, right? So I remember I bought up all his speeches. Approximately, it was maybe in 93 or something. I read every one of his speeches. What was his thought process like? And I found out what is interesting is he wasn't so much a political philosopher as a pragmatist. He looked at what Singapore has to offer the world, and he figured out what businesses, what things have to happen there, and through his governance philosophy made it happen. It's a systematic process. There's no magic. It's not like suddenly Singapore got lucky or something. It didn't hit oil or nothing like that. So that was one person I looked up to. In business terms, the person that I've always found fascinating again is Honda. And the reason is he started from a rural Japan background, being a mechanic. And he created one of the great engineering companies in the world. Honda is a very fine, superbly engineered car. Even now their engines are really good. So along the way he figured out a lot of things, metallurgy, advanced disciplines. I mean, making a world-class car is no joke. But he had no background in doing all this. How did he evolve that background to do it? You can see that's highly relevant. Both examples are very relevant to our context in India. Singapore is very relevant to us. And Honda's example is very relevant to Indians. So that's why I really look up to those and take inspiration from them.
Just like how Google, while they are a software company, have started to experiment with driverless cars and so, do you have any kind of an interest beyond software?
Yeah, we are doing a lot of experiments in our labs now, but those are all more software oriented at this point. We still have to grow in size to make bigger bets, because a self-driving car is what they call a $1 billion bet. You need like $1 billion in capital to make something like that happen and popular. And that itself, I think, is a very overcrowded bet right now. It's not just Google. There's 15 other companies, and Apple recently, it looks like they discontinued their efforts because there's too many players in it already. So again, there's no point in saying this is what is going to be hot 5 years from now. That's why you should do it, because if it gets super crowded and there's 500 players jumping in, maybe there's no money in it. That brings up the part about business again, that the fundamental first rule of business is find a customer. Can you find a customer?
True. And a customer who pays.
Yes, yeah.
So you're fascinated with sanitation and finding a solution to the garbage menace. Tell us about that.
So again, growing up in India, you are surrounded by the smells and sights, garbage to all of that. So it's a solvable problem. There are countries where garbage is actually now almost wanted because they convert to electricity, all of that. There's technologies available. Same way Singapore converts, they have a program that's essentially your sewage water to drinking water. They call it New Water. That's their brand name for it. You can almost call it toilet to tap, right? But the new water that comes up is cleaner than whatever natural source of water you find. So Singapore can do this, and the cost is very low. It's not that much. Actually, we can do this. But so these are things that obviously Indian cities should be doing it. But right now, we don't have the political system that can make these things happen.
At this point, any political aspirations?
No, I'm at least right now I'm focused on the business. This is important, so that's what I'm doing. But concluding that thing about Singapore, I said we can solve these problems. There's no reason to be pessimistic about these. But the way I would like to contribute is by solving it, for example, in our campus level. We have 4,000 people coming into work every day. How do we handle the garbage? How do we handle the sewage? All of that would be good learning grounds, test grounds, and then maybe scale up.
How did the name Zoho come about?
Zoho is, we were looking for our original name was AdvenNet, as people know, at least many people know. We were looking for a new name for our cloud or software as a service division. We wanted something that's easy to remember domain, which AdvenNet is not. So we knew we were going to address a small business. So we were looking for names related to that at that time, small office, home office, Soho. And Soho, of course, is taken. Then we tried variation. Natural substitution for S is a Z, so Zoho. That domain was available for $5,000 for sale. This was myself and Raju. We were sitting and talking about this. Raju said, this is a great domain, you should buy it for $5,000.
Is it true that it belonged to a restaurant owner who had to shut down?
No, actually it was not a restaurant. It was a hospitality CRM or some such thing that went bust. They had raised a lot of money and went bust. This was in the court liquidation process we got this domain. In the US, the system is efficient, so they take out all the assets and they auction it. This domain was auctioned at the moment we were looking for it. It so happened, so we got it.
And so one final question before we wrap up. You enjoy writing. Is there any place where listeners can come to read about your thoughts, or where can people find you?
So I don't post very much outside simply because I have so much work inside, but I'm planning to start a blog to post some of my articles I write inside. So because not everything I write, most things I write actually are not very proprietary information. Actually, they're general things, so I'll post it. So stay tuned. I might have a blog soon.
Excellent, and we'll keep our eyes peeled for it, Sridhar. Sridhar, thank you so much for talking. Such a privilege to come to a house where the Zoho story, the journey all started. It's an absolute privilege speaking with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Kiruba. I really appreciate being here.
You were listening to Sridhar Vembu, the CEO and founder of Zoho. Among the hundreds of interviews I've done with business leaders, I consider this conversation to be one of my personal favorites.